Okay, good morning. Today we are launching the World Economic and Social Survey 2017. That's this new report. This is an especially important milestone, as this is the 70th year that the survey has been issued. From the end of the Second World War through the Cold War, spurts of prosperity, periods of recession, moments of opportunities, and missed opportunities, the survey has been providing economic advice. This year, the staff of the survey took a step back to take a look at how well this economic advice has stood the test of time. To tell us how the survey has fared, we have Lenny Montiel, the former Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development for the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and Diana Alarcon, Chief of the Global Economic Monitoring Unit of the Development Policy and Analysis Division, UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Lenny, start off with you. Has the survey been on target over the last 70 years? Did the UN get it right?
Yep. Thank you. That's a nice introduction. Thank you very much. Well, good morning, everyone. It is a great pleasure to be here with all of you today, this morning, on the occasion of the launching of the 2017 World Economic and Social Survey, usually known as WES. And this has been one of the UN flagship publications since 1948. And this year it is entitled Reflecting on 70 Years of Development Policy Analysis. This year's survey is very special. It's being prepared to celebrate the 70 years of the publication by looking back at the contributions of all the surveys that have taken place during this period of time to the development thinking and practice in general, but also to the contributions to the debates on economic and social affairs at the General Assembly and ECOSOC in particular. The first edition of WES was published in January 1948, when the UN headquarters resided in Lake Success in Queens, New York. It is the oldest publication of its kind. WES 2017 has as a main objective to draw lessons from the past that are relevant to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. At this point, I will mention an important element, a very simple, yet fundamentally relevant at this time. International solidarity to support countries' development effort has been the basis for successful international cooperation and partnerships. Looking back, the General Assembly designated the 4 UN development decades, the predecessors of the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals, in an effort to strengthen international solidarity towards improving the well-being of people all over the world. It will be fair to say that the first UN development decade, from 1961 to 1970, was the most successful among the 4 decades of development during the 20th century. The goal of achieving a 5% growth rate in developing countries was achieved ahead of time, for instance. What distinguishes the first decade from the other 3 decades is the global economic conditions that prevailed during the 60s. At the time, the world has robust and widespread growth and stable trade and monetary systems. From the 1970s onwards, developed countries suffered from widespread stagflation, and many developing regions had to face severe development setbacks due to the debt crisis of the 1980s. What the survey highlights in these episodes is the importance of global coordination, maintaining a stable international trade and monetary systems in support of national development efforts. The survey has been ahead of the curve in many cases. A recent example is the forecasting of the global financial crisis of 2008-2009. As early as in 2006, the survey predicted the crisis. Unfortunately, the prediction turned out to be correct, and the global economy is still suffering from anemic growth. Unfortunately, the prediction and policy recommendations made at the time by the survey were not well heard by policymakers. They missed an opportunity to avoid the crisis, if not avoidable, to minimize its impacts on the global economy. This is not to say that forecasting or predictions exercises in the surveys were always right. Rather, the survey deserves more attention from policymakers. Policymakers can benefit from listening to alternative views about global development different to those of international financial institutions, for instance. In this regard, the World Economic Situation and Prospects, WESP, a sister publication of the West, is calling for enhanced international coordination to ensure consistency among macroeconomic policies, trade and sectoral policies to accelerate global growth and achieve the SDGs by 2030. The global consensus reached around the 2030 agenda signals the high ambitions of the international community for a sustainable future. The review of the past 70 years in West this year clearly shows that robust growth and a stable international trade and monetary system greatly matter for the implementation of the SDGs. Diana, the team leader of the West 2017, will present to you the main messages of the survey and will take questions after the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Lenny. Diana, what have we learned from the 70 years of the report, and how can these lessons help us right now?
Well, thank you for the question, and let me take you a little bit through the journey of the survey in order to address the question. Lenny has highlighted perhaps what is the main message that is coming from this survey. Current global conditions are not providing an enabling environment for the implementation of an ambitious agenda like the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and improved international coordination will have to play a much greater role in providing such enabling environment for development. Let me refer a little bit back to where the survey is coming from, the evolution of the survey, and some of the main messages that the survey has to share that would be relevant for the 2030 agenda. As Lenny said, this is the longest, the oldest publication of its kind. It was not until the year 1978 when the World Bank published the World Development Report, which is a report also on global development issues. In the survey, there has been a contribution of leading economists, among them Nobel laureates. I will mention just two, Kenneth Arrow and Lawrence Lane, but many other prominent economists have been part of the writing team of this survey through time. The mandate received in the year 1947, and I think that it is important to recall this, was very much consistent with Article 55 of the Charter of the United Nations. The mandate of the survey was to contribute with analysis, to promote the solution of international economic problems, higher standards of living, full employment, and conditions of economic and social progress and development. So this has been very much the inspiration of the analysis presented in the survey. I am not going to look at this chart in detail. All we are trying to say here is through 70 years, the survey has presented consistent analysis of the evolution of the world economy and the evolution of the UN Development Agenda as well, and has responded with analysis on the policy challenges of 70 years, grouped in 4 periods of time. The West has consistently produced prescient and accurate policy analysis in many instances. We are not trying to say we were always right, but there are several instances where the survey made what we think is an important contribution to the discussion about development policy. I will go back to the 1950s, where in the survey, there is very clearly a concept of development that is about transformation. It's not about marginal change in economies. It is about large-scale fundamental changes towards economic diversification, stable growth, improved standards of living, and very early on, the survey advised on sustainable use of natural resources. So we may recognize this concept of development as transformation very much as part of the discussion that we have nowadays with the Sustainable Development Goals. In the 1960s, the survey contributed to the analytical basis for the establishment of UN organizations, for the establishment of UNCTAD and UNIDO. Part of the analysis and evaluation about the need for these organizations was requested by ECOSOC and done in the survey. In the 1980s, the survey raised concerns over the large fiscal and trade deficits of developing countries right before the debt crisis. In the 1990s, the survey was very critical to policies of the one-size-fits-all kind of policies that drove adjustment programs in mainly Latin America and Africa, and that led to a decade or a decade and a half of lost development. And more recently, Lenny just mentioned, in the early 2000s, the survey was among the first publications that consistently warned against unsustainable global growth previous to the global financial crisis. So there are several instances in time where analysis in the survey has provided important advice and recommendations for stable development processes. The survey has been showing concern in the last few years about current growth trajectories that pose challenges to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And there is a series of lessons that could be relevant to take into account for implementation. Development requires development progress, and this is something that is very clear in these 70 years of review of the work of the survey. Development progress requires robust global economic growth, solid trade expansion, steady access to financial resources for development. The current growth trajectory in the last few years unfortunately does not provide the enabling environment for achieving the SDGs. Global economic governance mechanisms have proven insufficient to resolve global imbalances. And there are here many parallels that can be drawn between past and current challenges facing the international community. West 2017 highlights the key enabling factors for development that are relevant for the 2030 Agenda. And I will end up just summarizing or highlighting 5 key lessons from West, from 70 years review of development policy analysis that could be relevant for the 2030 Agenda. First, the global economy needs strong institutions and coordinated international action. Concerted international efforts with adequate representation from developing countries are required to accelerate world production growth, to facilitate the flow of goods and services, and to support effective resource utilization. The second key lesson is about the stability, the importance of stability in the international monetary and trade systems that underpin development. In that respect, the survey has consistently highlighted risk associated with volatile commodity prices and warned against protectionism. Regarding the international monetary system, the survey has advocated for a shift away from a single currency system and called for effective financial regulation and supervision. The third lesson that the survey is drawing attention on is on the importance of countries having adequate policy space to accelerate development. Flexible application of the international norms and commitments has facilitated economic recovery at times of crisis and major adjustments. And here, the experience of the 1950s, the post-war period, are very important in that regard. The flexibility that was shown by the IMF towards Western European countries was an important determinant in the success of these countries in eliminating foreign exchange restrictions and establishing current account convertibility, one of the most successful periods of economic growth, recovery, and development. The fourth lesson that we want to, the survey brings to the fore is the importance of international solidarity as the foundation for development and rebuilding of the global economy. And Lenny already referred to that. Going back in time, again, the post-war period is probably the best example of how generous international solidarity back then through the Marshall Plan was so important for the reconstruction of Western European economies, but also international trade and the financial sector. The fifth lesson is about the characteristics of development as multidimensional. Development is context-specific, and as I said before, it is about transformation. The important role of development planning and strengthened state capacities cannot be overlooked. Proper coordination across various policy areas and diverse actors are needed in bringing about structural and institutional changes which could lead countries towards economic diversification, stable growth, and improved living standards. And I will just leave with reflection, again, going back to the concern that the survey is expressing about the current weak global growth in the economy, which is likely to affect the achievement of the SDGs in multiple ways. Slow growth is likely to limit job creation and income growth, which in turn affects the efforts to eliminate poverty. It would constrain financial resources for investment in crucial areas such as infrastructure, healthcare, education, social protection, climate change mitigation, and adaptation. Furthermore, insufficient resources could undermine the political will to accelerate progress towards the Agenda 2030 for sustainable development. And I thank you very much for the opportunity to present the main messages of the survey.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Yes.
This is Mario Villar with EFE, the Spanish News Agency. I wanted to ask you about this key messages for the SDG implementation. A lot of the things that you've highlighted as needs, it seems that the current politics in many parts of the world are going right against those things, more protectionism, more isolation of countries. How big of a change does the world need to be able to steer towards the things we need to achieve the SDGs right now?
Lenny, yeah?
That's in the remits of magic. it's impossible to bring economic and social analysis into political prediction in the way you are suggesting. One thing is for sure, the reason, despite all the challenges that the international community is facing in terms of divergent views, in terms of economic, trade, climate-related policies, despite all the differences that are taking place around these issues at the moment, one interesting element is that the international community, in a very recent meeting in the G20, was able to, despite all those elements, to reinstate the value of multilateralism, the values of international cooperation, the values of international coordination as the basis, the foundation for keeping the international economy and international development efforts in the right track. We need to acknowledge that if international development would have depended only on the outputs of one event, very important, it would be easy. Of course, it depends on many factors and many variables. But I think what I would like to highlight is that the survey, again, brings back the notion that unless countries, leaders of the world, will keep these efforts of coordination, the achievement of the SDGs will be a big challenge for humanity. That's the key message.
Yes. Other questions? Oh, yes.
Ann Charles, Baltic Review. In the World Economic and Social Survey 2017, which reflects on 70 years of development analysis, did you cover the effects of 50 years of Soviet occupation, considering that the Baltic countries of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania only joined the United Nations on September 17, 1991?
In the early years of the survey, there was a request from ECOSOC to cover the trends of and the development situation of developed countries, developing countries, and what used to be centrally planned economies. So there is, during all this period of time, there is extensive coverage in the survey of the economies that had central planning. For obvious reasons, this breakdown of in regions was no longer after the centrally planned economies became transition or market economies, but there is extensive analysis on that. We didn't highlight a specific regional analysis in the presentation that we are doing today, but it does exist in the survey back in time.
Yes, you had a follow-up question?
Yep. In the report, looking back at the past few years, and you mentioned it in your presentation, for example, you were ahead seeing the financial crisis arriving a couple years before, etc. What are the main risks you see right now for the next few years in terms of the world economy and development for the SDGs?
Oops, sorry. What are the key risks? And this is something that the survey has been covering in the last few years, where we have, when we are recording and we are projecting a slow growth in the world economy. So there is a big risk of countries not being able to make enough progress in development because there is very slow growth in the world economy. There is very little space for countries to increase resources for development. International trade, there is a very slow growth of international trade that, again, does not provide the resources for countries to accelerate development. Access to financial resources and increase indebtedness of countries would also pose a risk to accelerate development. Low prices of commodities is obviously a constraint for many developing countries that largely depend on commodity exports. And we have the whole writing team here of both WESP and some colleagues from WESP, so they would be able to elaborate further if you want more specific details on many of these issues.
Okay. On that, if you have any further questions or would like to arrange interviews, please let us know. You could find our contacts at the bottom of the media advisory and the press release. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Fantastic. Good.